Hello. Welcome to another episode of the Business of Higher Ed podcast brought to you by The Fox Education. My name is David Fox. Higher education leaders are operating in one of the more complex environment that the sector has faced for a very, very long time. Across North America, and our speaker might tell us beyond, across North America, institutions are confronting enrollment pressure, rising costs, constrained public funding, growing scrutiny, correctly or incorrectly, growing scrutiny around value, and certainly job readiness, and an accelerating demand for workforce aligned learning and lifelong education. In this environment, the ability to move strategically and decisively is no longer optional. Nimbleness is a word we're going to talk about a lot today. Nimbleness has become a leadership imperative. Many presidents, and this has got to be a really, really, it is a very difficult time to be a president. Many presidents and governing boards turn to Stevens' strategy to help navigate these pressures. Stevens' strategy works with colleges and universities across the United States and Canada on academic portfolio strategy, financial sustainability, governance aligned change, and institutional repositioning, often during times of fiscal stress, enrollment disruption, or leadership transition. A core element of that work is Stevens Strategy's PRO or PRO model: prepare, reallocate, and operationalize. Rather than treating academic review as a compliance exercise, the PRO model helps leaders align data, governance, and execution so that difficult decisions are made transparently and then implemented. So my guest today is Jack Corby, who is the Vice President of Stevens Strategy. Jack works directly with presidents, provosts, governing boards, advising on portfolio strategy, organizational agility, and financial decision making. He brings a practical, leadership centered perspective on how institutions can move more quickly without losing mission, shared governance, or public responsibility, which is a very tall task. Today's conversation explores what it really takes to build nimble institutions and why agility, governance, financial reality, and workforce relevance must increasingly move together. So, Jack, Vice President Jack, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, David. I really, really appreciate it. That was the best intro I think I've ever received. So I'm going to steal a lot of the words you just said to the audience there.
Well, we do our best, you know.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
All right, let's start off here. Um, the word nimble in education, we're hearing more needs to be nimble. So we hear that in education we need to be nimbler, but what that means, I think, differs based on who's saying it. When Stevens' strategy talks about nimbleness in higher
hmm
education, what does that mean in practice beyond speed or responsiveness?
Totally. I think that's a great question. I appreciate us starting here. When we talk about nimbleness at Stevens Strategy, it's really around building a culture that allows you to move quickly while maintaining quality decision making and mission alignment. So we really want our institutions and the leaders on those institutions to have a culture of innovation, a culture of thinking outside the box, doing things differently, breaking down tradition for tradition's sake, and leaning further into their mission of their institution and seeking out new opportunities or asking hard questions internally to keep innovating the institution.
Okay. So why has nimbleness become a strategic differentiator for institutions now in 2026, 2025, going forward. Why has it become a strategic differentiator? And beyond, particularly given enrollment pressures, fiscal stress, and public scrutiny?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. You hit on, I would say, the big three. Nimbleness is becoming more and more of a requirement of leaders in their institutions. Because at face value, students, whether they're traditional 18 to 19-year-olds coming to your campus or they're adult learners or a workforce population, they expect campus to move a little bit quicker and to things to just happen at a faster pace. At a human level, the world is moving quicker now with technology and with innovation, and higher education is being, I would say, tasked to meet that moment, and to move quicker there. And then you listed off a couple of them, but the external pressures then facing our institutions, a lot of international policy and domestic federal policy, both in the US and in Canada, have really forced our institutions to think about doing things differently and really reevaluate the systems and processes that they have in place, whether it's around enrollment, around financial aid, whether it's around their own budgeting, whether it's around the type of leaders that they bring to their campus. That's been a big shift that we've seen since COVID, especially in the US, around kind of a breaking down of the traditional academic to dean to provost to president level. A lot of institutions are bringing in different types of unique learner or leaders, excuse me, which is spurring that innovation, but it's also bringing in an outside thought and people at the very top questioning a lot of higher ed's practices and questioning a lot of why higher ed has always done certain things, and kind of shifting gears at the institutional level.
Hmm. Hmm. Uh, so a few things there. The leadership stepping stones. So you are seeing more. Are you seeing in terms of bringing in leaders and bringing in different leaders? And I'm not sure if this is the same in the United States and Canada. You have a lot more universities and colleges than we do. Um, what are you seeing in those people who are being brought in from outside? But more importantly, what are you seeing in those schools
Mm,
that are making that decision? Um, because I know that's not an easy, that's been the way it's been for quite some time.
100%.
Um, what are those schools? Is there any commonalities in those schools who are looking outside and bringing in different people? And what are those? Are there particular characteristics of those people that are being brought in, maybe non-traditional academic leaders?
Yeah,
Some consistencies in the schools that are doing that and those leaders.
totally. Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say it's a complicated one. I think the common thread throughout kind of the shift in mindset, again, from the traditional academic moving up into the ranks of administration to leaders coming in from different places, is simply institutions feeling, I would say, a little bit more pressure to act differently. Again, kind of going to what we were saying earlier. I think when it comes to the institutions that we've worked with, that we've seen that bring in, I would say, an outside leader or somebody that might have come in as a VP level, but outside of the academy, didn't come up through the faculty or didn't come up traditionally through an administration. It's board and board members getting together and saying, we need a leader that does X, Y, and Z. And a lot of the times they look internally and they don't have those types of leaders, or they want to explore what else is out there. Higher ed also, again, in the last, I would say definitely 30 years, but in the last 10, maybe 15, since the 2008, 2009 recession, has really shifted to really rely on advancement and development to spur a lot of the institutional growth. So presidents have had to become way more external than they ever have been, have had to hit the road, have had to fundraise. And those are skills that don't inherently come with a tenured faculty position or a vice president of student life. So advancement, I think, has also been a key element as boards have considered what types of skills they need internally, for the institution to have successful, and what skills the president needs to have. advancement has really risen to the top there as one of you've got to be able to raise money. You've got to be able to connect with donors and speak on the alumni or speak to the alumni, speak on the mission of the institution. And oftentimes former CFOs or business executives or people from outside the academy grow those skills in different industries and are able to translate them into higher ed overall. Long-winded answer. I hope I
No,
touched on
no,
it.
no. We're all about long-winded answers here. Uh, we're gonna circle back to that in a minute, but um, the leadership and the expectations and the skills of leaders in higher education, boy, oh boy, that's you know that's a challenging job. That's in any event. So leaders, talking about leaders, um, particularly at a time when there's very choppy waters in education
Mhm.
financially right now. Um, there's a lot of things changing, whether it be technology, whether it be, you know, uh, do you find some leaders feeling kind of trapped between the need to move quickly, like, okay, we got to solve this,
Mhm.
and the responsibility to respect the shared governance model? So that is, can nimbleness coexist realistically with shared governance, unionized environments, regulatory oversight, or in your experience, your expertise, does it require redefining how governance functions in higher ed?
Mm. That's a great question. I I'd say I'd lean into the former part of your question. I think
Mhm.
shared governance and I would say the different types of financial savviness I think that institutions have to go through right now definitely can coexist. But it does take, I would say, a level playing field of what shared governance is on each and everyone's campus. And from the administrative side, coming into shared governance, that means ultra transparency, giving as much information as you can to the faculty and staff, leadership groups, leadership teams, whether it's a formal senate, whether it's a faculty staff gatherings, but giving as much information as you can. And I think one key thing too with that transparency is it's not just providing the information, but it's educating on what that information means. So for institutions that
Okay.
are running 40 or $50 million budgets every year, a $40,000 cut sounds like a lot. But if you haven't educated the faculty on the gravity of different situations, on what this looks like, haven't taught them to think, I would say a little bit more of what a modern higher education institution needs to think like, you're going to run into a lot of conflict with the faculty and administration. But for presidents that we've worked with and I've seen personally that are very transparent with their faculty, very transparent with their staff on this is our current situation. We're running a deficit or we risk running a deficit and we need to shift gears a little bit. And it's going to take some hard decisions and it's going to take some shifting of gears. But this is the light at the end of the tunnel. Those are the presidents that are really having the most success because they're leading with transparency, they're informing. And then I would say, lastly, they're empowering. So they're asking the faculty to weigh in on different decisions. They're asking them to weigh in on how to make these decisions and how to lean into it. And it doesn't mean that the faculty opinions are the ones that you always go with. And those are always difficult conversations about saying, I think we're going in a different direction. But as long as people feel as if you've really heard them and you've really asked them genuinely, what do you think? And they've given a chance to lean into that shared governance model, I think those are the institutions that are really coming out of this and are going to be surviving the next 5 to 10 years. The ones that either doesn't have a healthy shared governance and faculty don't feel empowered and really have to grab for a lot of that empowerment, or an administration that's keeping things in the dark, or a board that isn't being overly transparent, even with the administration. Those are the ones that really have, I would say, a broken culture to some degree and really need to reevaluate what nimbleness looks like to them, what the institution needs to look like, and how to move forward through that over the next probably 2 to 3 years, but especially into 2030 and beyond.
Yeah. 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 I mean, the focus, obviously there's short-term things, short-term focus, right? That we need to attend to these things. but not losing sight of, even though right now different financial circumstances for different schools, not losing sight of things down the road. And do you find that institutions now, some institutions are too short-sighted in terms of uh in terms of even if they're being very open and transparent, uh looking focusing too much on the right immediate and not enough, or uh too much, you know, down the road and not enough now. I mean, I
Mhm.
would think most institutions are very focused in the here and now right now.
Yeah, so if you had asked me that question, I would say a year or 18 months ago, I probably would have said yes, a lot of them are being too short-sighted, but we've seen over the last year with accreditation shifts, with the international enrollment shifts and the federal policies, especially here in the US, but I know with the quotas going on in Canada and the recent shifts, institutions have to be looking 1 to 2 academic years in advance because you never know with the external circumstances that are going to shift. And if you start planning for 4 to 5 years out, you might miss a big opportunity, or you might miss a big, I would say, iceberg that you need to navigate, for lack of a better term. So I would say the institutions that we're seeing, again, that we're working with, are having the most success, are definitely setting, I would say, 2 to 3 year pillars, or like where you would like to be in those 3 years, but really focusing on the next 18 months and trying to find ways to navigate that. And I think that plays into where we started this conversation, that nimbleness aspect. You don't want to get tied to a vision or reality that what does 2035 look like, or what does even 2030 look like for us, and get blinders on. And again, you never know when you're going to get blindsided by an issue if you are focused so solely on the 4 to 5 year outlook. And that's why when we do strategic planning with institutions or we do board retreats, we're always stressing the 2 to 3 year window, not tying yourself to rudimentary KPIs, or false numbers, but really trying to measure success in an organic way and trying to focus on the next 2 to 3 years, to make sure the institution survives. You don't want to lose sight again of a goal, but you really need to keep your goals practical and aimed at the next couple of years, so your institution can move forward and navigate, as you said, the very choppy waters that higher ed, in North America is going through right now.
Hmm. Hmm. So it was a while ago, but it's not that long ago we were in the COVID pandemic, and
Mhm.
you want to talk about agility, you want to talk about nimbleness in higher ed, and in the economy and the private sector. Um, but was that a real teachable moment? I'm assuming the answer is yes. Coming out of that pandemic, what expectations around agility
Mm.
have permanently changed for presidents, boards, faculty, and external shareholders? Or are there expectations that have permanently changed, or did they change and now we're moving back this way? Is everything kind of always fluid?
Mhm. I would say everything changed during COVID, 100%. And I would say at the core value, the relationship between stakeholders,
Yeah.
faculty, staff, board members, communities, students, and institutions was disrupted. Students, for instance, wanted a more a la carte model. They wanted to be able to take classes at home. They liked the hybrid nature, and they wanted to, I would say, lose the rigidness of this is the curriculum, this is where you go, this is how you move, you come to class every day. And faculty and staff also saw how their non-higher ed peers, family members, community members were going to their jobs and existing in a 2 days in office, 3 days at home, or 3 days in office, 2 days at home kind of workplace and environment. And they wanted that too. And you saw the great resignation in 2021, people leaving American higher ed and trying to seek out those opportunities elsewhere outside of the academy from institutions that weren't nimble and weren't, agile, and forced everybody to come back 5 days a week, in office. And so I think the relationship between institutions and the major stakeholders definitely shifted. And then higher ed's model of, I would say, at its core, of delivering academics and delivering that academic mission has had to shift. Online education has skyrocketed. There's new corporations now that have brought different types of online education. We've seen a lot of different types of institutions introduce online learning and trying to meet students where they're at.
Right.
And then I think the last thing that has shifted, especially here in the US, is the conversation around ROI in a college degree, and whether or not it makes sense to invest in college, or if you're better off going to high school and then going and graduating and getting a trade certificate or getting certified in a different vocation, and bypassing a 4-year degree that costs $200,000 to $300,000 altogether. And that conversation has really perked up around the pandemic and people going through their own personal financial turbulent times, and really weighing that, whether or not it makes sense to invest in a 4-year degree. And that's a conversation that's still happening right now in higher ed, especially at the federal level, around student loans, student loan forgiveness. But that conversation came back up during COVID with kind of the shifting business model, I would say, of higher education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I want to get to the next thing, which is, I think, going to bring a lot of this into sort of practical application, which is, do you call it the pro model?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So the Steven Strategy Pro Model as an agility framework. So most institutions, as I understand it, they don't fail at strategy. They may fail, or they may be challenged at turning decisions into actions. So
Yep.
other speakers, other guests we've had have talked about reading thousands of strategic reports, and those strategic reports really, are they put in a drawer, and are they really applied? Um, so Stephen's strategy, though, the pro model, prepare, reallocate, operationalize, is often described as different from traditional program review. How does the pro model enable nimbleness
Mm.
without destabilizing institutions?
Totally. It's a great question. I appreciate that. So our pro model, or pro process, is really, it's I'll back up and then I'll answer
Yeah.
your question. So it's a program review, which is both academic and non-academic programs. And for institutions out there, that looks like facilities, that looks like athletics, that looks like residence life. So reviewing every corner of, I would say, your financial budget of the institution. And it's a process that breaks it down in 4 different metrics. So it's mission alignment, uh, diving in and looking at finances in your margin, marketability, which is basically demand of the marketplace for those different types of programs, and then quality and outcomes overall. And that one actually has been really relevant in the last couple of years. Again, going back to that student loan conversation and ROI. So wanting to make sure that you're not just investing in the programs that the marketplace is demanding, but you're investing in quality programs on campus that set students up for success. So we measure campuses, or we work with partner campuses to measure along those 4 different metrics. And then we assign them a score after survey and focus group conversations and data reviews with different stakeholders across campus. And every program gets a qualitative score, and then they're ranked from highest to lowest. And then we break that up into quartiles. And the top quartile, the ones that you go all in on, those are the ones that really drive the institution forward, meet the mission, are financially viable, are marketable, and have really good outcomes. The middle one is the one that we've really got to have conversations about what makes sense, what's working, what's not working. Those are the ones we spend the most time with. And then the bottom quartile are the ones that we typically recommend a recalibration for. And that often gets confused with just direct elimination. I want to just stop right there. And that's one thing we always get from faculty saying, if my program ends up in the bottom quartile, does that mean I don't have a job tomorrow? And that is absolutely not the case. That's the one where we really try to work with you to understand, where can we optimize overall? So is that combining programs to save some costs? Is that shifting gears altogether? Into making sure that the program kind of gets recalibrated, and the mission of the institution is still met. But we use different strategies there to make sure those kind of, I would say, rise up and move up to the top and the middle quartile. But going back to what I was saying, the middle quartile is really the one that we spend the most time with, because we want to move as many of those programs from yellow to green as we can throughout that process and really strengthen the institution overall.
Okay. Interesting. Um, why do traditional program reviews often fail to lead to real change?
That's a great question. I go back, I'm going to stress this and I'm going to sound like a broken record, but they're not transparent with people and they're not transparent of the realities facing the campus. Again, program reviews often signal that something is wrong. And I would say also, too, that oftentimes we get brought in when something is going wrong, but institutions should be doing program reviews every 5 to 7 years. It doesn't need to be a huge in-depth process like we do when we work with campuses, but they should be reviewing their programs and optimizing them to make sure they're meeting the moment for students, making sure that they are relevant, making sure that they're still delivering quality results, and that students are graduating and able to find post-secondary opportunities either in graduate school or moving into a job post-campus, and making sure that they're quality programs. So I would say, to answer your question, it's definitely transparency from the top, and leaders have got to just be transparent with faculty and staff and say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and this is what we hope to accomplish from it. And then stemming from that transparency, it's a lack of involvement. Oftentimes we will get brought in for program reviews and the chair of the faculty senate will say, well, they tried to do this 6 months ago and somebody did this and it didn't really work and everybody didn't like it and nothing really got done because the faculty voted against it. And that doesn't really advance the mission of the institution because you've wasted time then in that time span doing a failed program review, because you didn't involve the rest of campus. So for leaders out there that are considering a program review and you don't want to hire an external consultant, I think my biggest piece of advice is to put together a joint task force or committee with faculty, staff, even some students, if you want to involve students, and really let them drive change on campus. Tell them where they need to go, tell them the desired outcome, but really empower them to make that change on campus, enable them. And I think the last thing why these typically fail is the lack of level playing field around data. And data is key in these conversations. But if faculty, staff, students, or even faculty department to department or staff department to department are not operating under a common understanding or even common definitions, or don't have access to the same data, you're going to have a tough time getting things optimized and then even going forward operationalizing a lot of the recommendations or changes because you have people that are confused or not informed entirely on the process, or even when best intentions are met, the data doesn't tell you what it needs to tell you because it's not working for you, it's working against you, or data is competing with each other. So the last thing is really, if you don't have good data on campus and you don't have common data across your campus, program reviews like this are very, very tough and an uphill battle and often lead to disruption when you go to operationalize and implement a lot of the changes that you would like to make.
It's an interesting point that I've heard from other guests as well, which is that academic institutions, they have tremendous amounts of data.
Mm-hmm.
Tremendous amounts of data. A challenge, some have said, is that data is not often used, or that data is maybe not used optimized, I guess is a word you might use. Are you finding more that institutions are improving their organization, I guess, recognition and use of data, or do we still have a long way to go with that? And again, there's a lot of different institutions, right? Everyone's going to be different, but there's a lot of data there that I would think would be very, very helpful. And my guess is some places are a bit better at using it, more efficient at using it than others.
So to answer your question, I think it's both. So I think we have come a long way with data, but we still have a long way to go. And I think going back to, again, this nimbleness aspect, institutions that we've worked with, we try to stress not just sharing data across campus and accessing it, but being able to track it in real time and making sure that the decisions that you're making are up to date. One of the things higher ed has struggled with as an industry is the tracking of data that comes from the federal level is often 3 to 4 semesters behind because you have to track the data, you have to get it from the institutions, it's got to go to the Department of Education, it has to be compiled, it has to be cleaned, gaps have got to be filled in, it gets filtered through the many sub departments on within the department, and then it gets posted online to iPads here in the US. And the pro of that is that we have access to these massive data sources and we have great data at our fingertips that's public, that's available, that the department does a great job of tracking, but it's often 3 to 4 semesters behind or 18 to 24 months behind real time. So like the data that will get released here in a couple of weeks will actually be from fall 24. So we're pretty behind in that aspect of data that's coming out. So for institutions that are making a lot of these decisions in real time, you really need to be nimble. You've got to do a great job of tracking your data internally on campus, knowing where students are enrolled, knowing how much it costs to teach a student in each of the majors and the departments on your campus, knowing where spending is, things like that. But you have to have systems in place to track data a little bit more real time, up to date, that can kind of help with that nimbleness. I think higher ed has done a really good job overall, and a lot of the institutions we've worked with have built good institutional research teams, or CIOs have taken it on to track data a little bit more and share it across campus. But I still think there's a long way to go, both microly on campuses and then macroly as an industry for tracking and producing real time and up to date data.
Okay. All right. Um, so then we talk about data, we talk about data informed decisions, we talk about transparency, we talk about strategy. We don't always want to be you talked about the middle, the yellow
Mm-hmm.
area, the green area, I assume, and then red. Um,
Exactly.
how do you help presidents? Because it as I said, very difficult job with so many different moving pieces. How do you help presidents when we're looking at a program or we're looking at an overall portfolio of programs? How do you
Mm-hmm.
help presidents determine like when a program should, we can use all kinds of different words, but let's say cut.
Mm-hmm.
Paused is another one I've heard. Redesigned or invested in. Like what is involved in that from a practical perspective? How do you guys help presidents doing that?
Totally. So when the pro process is finished and we have those 3 quartiles as you outlined, so the green, the yellow, and the red, it's really around conversations, and it all goes back to mission and where you'd like to be in 2 to 3 years. So it's really trying to understand what the institution wants to look like, what it currently looks like, what's working well, and what isn't. And then I think the last thing around that vision setting is we when you cut a lot of the things, or when you come to the realization that some of the things in the red have got to be moved, and whether they're paused or cut, as you said, it opens up doors and resources for other opportunities. So then it's helping them understand, well, cutting this is great and it gives you money, but what are you going to do with that money? Or what are you going to do with those resources? Or what are you going to do to reinvest and better the institution? So we help them model and we help them understand a little bit about the options that exist after a cut is made. For a lot of the presidents that we work with, it's just kind of closing the deficit gap. For a lot of them that we work with, it's closing the deficit gap and then opening up opportunities for, again, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, meeting the moment of where the institution is, or adding programs that you weren't offering in the past or you would like to offer. Um, but once we finished, I would say like phase 2 of the pro process, which is coming to terms with those, the ranking and the understanding and communicating that out to the faculty and being transparent, it's then helping them model and understand the options and the roads that exist after that, and coming up with the best path forward for the institution.
And so during that reallocation phase,
Mm-hmm.
that's where I imagine there's quite a bit of discussion, let's say.
Yep.
Um, when I say political, obviously both Canada, the United States, other places, there's government political. There's
Yep.
also local political, regional political, there's political in terms of sort of the campus. How do you balance that political feasibility with the financial necessity? So I'll give an example sort of from Canada. We have
Yeah.
institutions, some institutions, for example, that are in northern communities or rural communities. They are really drivers. There's very important in those regions. There may not be another school for a tremendous distance. Um, Things that happen at that school have a tremendous impact. Not only, you know, provincially and maybe even federally, but particularly in those regions. Those
Yep.
schools are critical to those regions. You're going into someplace like that.
Hmm.
How do you balance? There's at the end of the day, there is a financial, something's got to happen financially, let's say.
Yep.
How do you balance the politics and the political feasibility with the financial necessity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so. You start with trying to understand, I'd say, the issue at hand, right? So if the financial issue is so overbearing that there's really no other option, then you lean into that and you have to make the decisions you have to make. I think if you're running a thin margin and you want to optimize and move forward into the next, I would say, iteration of the institution, that's when I start having conversations with community stakeholders about what do they need? What do they need the institution to be? Because people will answer that question very differently, but you often find common threads throughout it. So going back to the pro model and the pro process, that demand and that quality aspect really gets weighted heavily in institutions and in moments like that, because you need to understand what the institution needs to be doing for that local community, and really trying to understand, to your point, the political ramifications of what shifts make and how it impacts the broader community there. I think, and this often happens here in the US, it's those presidents then having conversations with provincial leaders or even federal leaders about what their campus means to the community. And if there's any extra funding that could come their way or extra resources that could come their way, and really trying to make your case and pitch as best as you can for why your institution is not just great for your students, faculty, and staff, but for the broader community and up in supporting the rural area, whether it's from an economic lens, whether it's from a social lens, whether it's from just a humanitarian lens, but really doing your best to make that pitch and make that case. I think if both of those things don't work as you would hope they would, and you need to move forward with, again, leaning into that financial aspect, it's having tough conversations, but always, again, leading with transparency and really understanding what are the capabilities on campus and in the area, and really trying to lean into those hard conversations. But I think to answer your question directly, it's leaning in and trying to understand exactly what the campus needs to be politically and socially for the greater area and the rural area around them. And if you have the resources to do that, becoming that. And if you don't, communicating that you don't, and then making some hard decisions, and doing what you can to save the institution. Because at the end of the day, an open institution is better than a closed one.
Yeah, yeah. So we go through the process through the pro model or the pro phases. Um, we can make decisions, and institutions, you can make recommendations, you can work with the institutions. What does it mean to operationalize change? But more than that, we talked about lots of strategic reports happen. What happens with those strategic reports?
Yep.
You know, how do we operationalize change, but also how do we ensure decisions reasonably stick, and that we continue moving forward? We've spent a lot of time, we've spent a lot of resources to come to do all this analysis.
Yeah, that's a great
Presidents
question.
come and go, right?
Yes.
Leaders come
Yeah.
and go. Different people have different ideas, right?
Yeah.
Politics change, prime ministers change, presidents change, premiers change, funding models change. So, can you speak a bit to that? Uh,
Yeah. how do you maintain that change, and how do you maintain the implementation of change through all of that? And I think the beauty of our process is if it is really led by the faculty, staff, and students, and you really, maybe not the students so much, but if it's really led by the faculty and staff, and you really empowered them from the onset and included them in the process and made it transparent, they're going to want the change by the end of it. They're going to want to reap what they've sown, and they want the fruits of their labor to come to fruition. And you might not have a lot of happy people. Like you might have change that makes like discomfort and breeds discomfort on campus. But one of the key aspects in the implementation phase is if you've done phases 1 and 2 correctly, and you've done the data collection, you've had conversations, and you're transparent about the results, and you're transparent about what this means for campus and where we're going from here, a lot of the implementation is pretty natural because faculty and staff want to see it through because they were involved in the process and it wasn't shoved down their throats or it wasn't forced upon them um, in that way. When you get down to the nitty gritty and how do you really make change on campus, it's continuing that empowerment, and it's communicating every day effectively about what's working, what's not. And then I think one of the last things too is it's celebrating those wins. Change really only happens a day at a time. So you need to be recognizing the people that are driving that change and the wins that the campus is having and showing them, I know this is a long process. I know that we're getting there, but we had a win today. We had a win tomorrow, and we're just going to keep stacking and building a lot of those wins to see it happen and to see it out. I think the last way I'll answer your question too is from the practical side of it. It's assigning multiple people to be champions or leaders of different aspects of that change. So if the change is we need to shift this athletic program and we unfortunately need to phase it out because it doesn't make sense, and we would like to combine these two program or academic programs, and we're going to reduce some funding to facilities and invest it here, then it's assigning people from the business office and faculty to oversee the shift in the business model. It's assigning people from athletics and some faculty and some other staff members to help the students and the coaches transition that athletic program. But it's a cross campus collaboration of what this looks like. It's a cross campus collaboration is what this looks like, and making sure that the change happens and it's led by the people that want it. And you're assigning leaders for each of those aspects of change because they're the ones that ultimately will live and breathe that change. As to your point, when the presidents have transitioned, when the premiers have transitioned, when the students have left campus, it's really the faculty and the staff that'll live and breathe those changes. So they need to be the ones not only helping inform the decisions, but living it out and carrying out those changes.
And how do you, or is this part of what you do? How do you prevent slippage? Because
Mm.
there's going to be a lot of intensity put into the process. Okay, now this is what we're going to do. I imagine in some cases there's a organization in a sense of structure, right? Because you've got to assign people that are going to, champion this or believe in this, or at the very least believe it needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
But particularly with unpopular or challenging changes, is there not a tendency for there to be some slippage? Stephen's strategy is left to campus. We're not as maybe a president has changed. How do you how is it how do you best avoid once you've made a decision? Okay, we've gone through this whole process. It was a tough process. These are the decisions that made. How do you prevent slippage back?
Yeah, I always go back to a term. I forget where I read it, but it's plan slow and act fast. So it's as soon
Okay.
as you know that that's the decision, and we've come to terms with that's the decision, you do it as quickly as possible. And you really try to help them build an implementation plan that moves them through those difficult decisions quickly, so you can get to the other side. Because oftentimes we've seen that, to your point, that slippage happens when it's a tough decision and it says, I'll get to it tomorrow, or
Right.
something else has come up that I've got to prioritize. So we stay with campuses and we work with them to push through a lot of those hard decisions quickly. I think, too, with with a lot of those difficult decisions, we build implementation plans in the last phase of the pro modeling process. So we work with campuses to kind of map out what this change will look like,
Mhm.
and to give them a best estimate of the time there. So that way they have an idea of when things should be happening, when the champions or the leaders of each initiative have an idea of when different things should be happening. And obviously they don't always go well or to the T. Things do get in the way or are prioritized, but it's really helping them push through those hard decisions and the ones that are going to be most painful quickly. Because those are the changes that, as you said, will carry on and drag out and be more difficult the more you do it. So it's really helping them just do it quickly and efficiently, and providing the best runway or off ramp for that decision as you can.
Okay. 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 Moving on. A lot of institutions we hear a lot about continuing education. We hear a lot about workforce learning. Um, Micro credential is a term that we hear multiple times per day, right?
Yep.
If nimbleness is tested anywhere in higher education, it is in continuing education and workforce learning. And, that's tied into the idea of lifelong learning, right? Alumni relationships, keeping those relationships going. So, a lot of institutions are seeing continuing education and micro credentials as critical to financial sustainability or improving sustainability, and as well as public relevance
Yeah.
locally and beyond. Why are these areas so difficult for institutions to move quickly in?
That's a great question. I think there is a lot of common misconceptions that if we start an online program, our faculty that are here on campus will just record some sessions and teach it
Right,
online and be able to go. Or if we
right.
start this online program and we hire a third party to help us build like actual online modules, or we take something out of the box and we slap our logo on it, like students are going to come. And I think that that's not always the case. And actually, often, unless you're, I would say, a top 50 brand in the world, it's very rarely the case. And I think the core of that is institutions try to be everything to everybody, but in turn, when you do that, you become nothing to nobody.
Mm,
And it's hard for institutions really to do a lot of those different things and the traditional ways that they have been done. Starting an online program is basically recreating an institution from the ground up. You might have the same logo, you might have the same people, but it's a very different model of delivering academics. It's a very different way of engaging with students. It's a very different way of marketing your campus, of enrolling students. Typically, online programs have much quicker onboarding times than institutions that are stuck on a year-long application cycle that higher ed is used to aren't accustomed to. The customer service aspect for online is much different than the customer service aspect for traditional higher ed. So there's a lot of practical things that I would say hold back micro credentialing or online. And then in terms of the upskilling and the workforce development side, a lot of those institutions that start that and often have struggles or even fail with those, going back to my earlier point, don't meet their community where they're at, aren't offering the right things or aren't communicating with the community about what does the community need, how can we fulfill it, and how can we work together to upskill, and work together. A lot of the institutions that we have had great success with building platforms like that go to businesses in the area, go to the local chamber of commerce, go to larger corporations that live nearby, and ask them what do they need, what gaps do they have in their workforce development, in their local training, what small businesses are failing and might need some younger talent, and then work with them to build programs either on site or even at those places to ensure that they have students that are ready to enroll, as well as I would say meet the needs of the larger community.
And that, what you just said, I mean, that really gets into the next question that I was going to ask, which is distinguishing institutions that successfully scale lifelong learning and workforce partnerships. I guess what I would say, or I would ask, is, yeah, that it makes sense. Go to the local, go to the local. I mean, whether it's Chamber of Commerce, go to local governments, go to associations, etc. But when you have multiple schools doing that,
Hmm.
like how does that how does that so you know like in a place like Toronto, for example,
Yep.
there are a number of institutions here. Um, and everybody is one way or another doing continuing it. They've been doing it for a long time too, but it's becoming more and more important or perceived as more important. How do you distinguish that when you've got, even if it isn't in the same city, or even maybe not in the same province, how how do you distinguish your workforce development, your upskilling or your reskilling or your micro credentials, uh, when a lot of people, particularly right now, are really focused on that from a
Hmm.
sustainability perspective? If I do a micro credential in data analytics here, and there's 10 other micro credentials in data analytics at a whole assortment of universities or colleges. So what's the strategy there?
Yeah. I'd say it is find the 4 to 5 things that makes your institution unique. Lean all the way into that and make sure those threads are through every aspect of your institution.
Okay.
So when you do data analytics, for instance, right? If you're doing it at a massive R1 institution, I want my data analytics degree to be research focused. I want to be diving into real world problems. I want to be diving into real, I would say, things that live and breathe the institution or live and breathe the
Okay.
geographical area you're in. If you're in a small campus in a rural area and you're getting a micro credential in data analytics, it should be narrowly focused. It should be through the lens of that rural community. It should be through the lens of the 4 to 5 things that make that institution unique or why people come to that campus. We're often, one of my favorite examples is Hiram College in Ohio in 2015 started a program called Tech and Trek. So every campus, or excuse me, every student when they came to campus was given an iPad, and they were as long as they graduated in 4 years, they got to keep the iPad, but all of their courses used the iPad, and that was their distinguished model. So everyone, whether you were the creative arts or creative writing major, whether you were the healthcare and you were going on to be a nurse or a nurse practitioner or a PA, whether you were a student athlete studying economics, everyone had an iPad and everyone used their iPad in all of their classes. And everyone became proficient in the iPad, but you also then use technology and leverage technology throughout all of your classes. And that became their distinguishing thing. Hiram was known for creating not just great people and that were going to go on to be liberally arts driven and liberally arts focused, but they knew technology and they knew how to meet the moment of the world, and where the campus and the community was. And that became the thing that made them known. And I mean, applications skyrocketed, yield dropped, and they were in a really, really good financial place following that. And they did a great thing. They found exactly what can make their institution unique, what made them unique, and they strung it through every piece of their campus fabric. And it really stood out and made all the difference. So for institutions that are looking to get into micro credentialing or looking to get into programs or trying to understand their market positioning, it always goes back to what are the 4 to 5 things that makes your campus unique. And I think that the other candid thing that no one really talks about with this conversation is if you can't find 3 to 4 of them, you got to invent it and you've got to figure it out. I credit Hiram, like Ohio has a ton of small liberal arts colleges,
Yeah.
and they probably didn't have a lot of distinguishing factors from a Denison, an Oberlin, a Kenyon, a lot of these other small liberal arts under 2,000 student campuses, but they created it and they made it. So right now, as things kind of shift and shake and the ground moves out from under you, if you don't know what makes your campus unique and you don't have, I would say, a strong brand or you don't have a national brand, it's creating and being strategic around what can we do that we can weave through every aspect of this campus that'll make us unique, from micro credentialing to our traditional 4 year college to graduate degrees and so on, and making sure it stands out in the marketplace.
Well, and that's a great example, and um, I have to give a pat on the back to my alma mater, Nichols College in Dudley Hill, Massachusetts, who has forever, uh, you get a laptop.
Yep.
For decades. You come now the laptops. It was always interesting to see the seniors when the freshmen came in, the size of the laptops, right? That as it was moving forward. But yeah, it was. Listen, here's a laptop. This is part of the whole deal, and you're gonna do all this stuff on the laptop. So, Hiram College, great job. Nichols College also doing a great doing has been doing that really well for a very long time. Um, should presidents and boards position continuing education and micro credentials within the academic portfolio?
Ooh, I my cop out answer is that really depends on the institution. I'd say for most institutions, yes, but again, it all goes back to how you do it and where you do it. And if there's a need, again, from a local business or a partner that you can seek out and they have a need for it and you can build it with them or you can build it for
Yeah.
them, go all in. I think that is one of the ways that we're recommending a lot of institutions kind of navigate the waters. The only way you're going to get through turbulent times is with a partner and trying to understand how you can serve the community more directly through those partnerships is definitely the way to go. So I fully on board with micro credentialing. I think it's a great, again, it meets student learners, adult learners where they are right now. They want a nimble, a la carte higher education experience. And micro credentialing is a way to do that for people that already have a bachelor's degree but want to get upskilled. You just have to make sure you find the right partner and that it makes sense for your institution.
So on that, what are the in your experience, what are the challenges or what are the I guess could be governance, it could be staffing, it could be financial models. What are the things that are most often they prevent, like you're talking about finding the partner, leaning in, right? What are the things that most often prevent institutions from responding quickly enough to employer-driven upskilling, reskilling, training needs?
The mindset that this is how we've always done it, that doesn't work for us is the number one thing.
Okay.
And I think oftentimes we hear from presidents that the faculty drive that mindset. Sometimes we hear from the presidents that boards drive that mindset. So I think again, it goes back to if you're a new president on campus, begin communicating with your faculty about what is going on in higher education right now. Begin telling them every month, this is what's changing. This is what other campuses are doing. This is what peers are doing. Begin planting seeds with them and asking them for input, asking them what they could be doing differently,
Right.
asking them what the campus could be doing differently, and begin to, again, plant those seeds about where higher education is going. And that doesn't mean we're going to leave the traditional 4-year degree behind. That is always going to have a need. It might become a 3-year degree in some places,
Yeah.
but there's always going to be a traditional higher education experience. The question is if the institution is going to adapt and meet the moment. And a lot of that hinges on the faculty shifting their mindset. A lot of that hinges on the board shifting their mindset. And you have to begin planting those seeds the moment you get to campus and communicating about this is what other campuses are doing. I'm not saying we're going to do it. I just want to let you all know this is where the industry is headed and communicating with them and being transparent. So if a moment does present itself of creating a partnership with a local business and they would like a micro credential created, or we see this often in healthcare, right? Hospitals need upskilling and need credentialing or need skills as healthcare changes. Creating partnerships with them, you've got to be able to meet them where they're at. You often have to go teach at the hospital. You often have to bring medical faculty to them and teach them in different ways than you would teach a 19-year-old medical or nurse student studying PA who wants to go on to be a nurse. It's a different shift in mindset. And the moment you can start planting those seeds with different faculty, board, and staff, the better off you're going to be in the long term.
Um, so much of what we've talked about is leadership and the needs of leadership and the changing demands on leadership. Um, it's a leadership test. Nimbleness I think, is a leadership test. Uh,
100%.
Not just a leadership test, but certainly a leadership test. You've talked about this in other answers and pieces, but in your experience, Stephen's strategy experience,
Hmm.
what leadership qualities separate successful change agents from those who are going to struggle?
Yeah. Um, I've said it. Communication, I think, is probably the biggest one. Open-mindedness, which we've talked about. I think the last thing, like if I had to pick a top three, the last one I would put is trust of your team. You have like higher ed in today's world, and with how many things are being thrown at presidents, like we've talked about, you've got to be able to trust your on-campus team. You've got to be able to trust your cabinet. You've got to be able to trust the people directly related to you, even if it's just your executive assistant or a chief of staff. You have got to be able to trust the people around you, and you've got to make sure you have the right team in place. I always go back to Jim Collins, right? Like it's the people on the bus matter way more than the destination or what seat they're in. You need to have good people on your team, and you need to make sure that you can trust those people. Because the moment you feel like you can't, and the moment you feel like you've got to carry all the burden, that's the moment that you're going to start to crack as a leader. And that's the moment that your institution is going to start cracking. So you've got to be able to trust the people. You've got to be able to talk to them in confidence about real issues that's impacting the institution. You've got to be able to be transparent with faculty when the time comes, and you've got to really be able to communicate well um, with the issues facing you and what's going on campus.
Yeah. So trustees and boards.
Yep.
We've talked about being open, being transparent. Um, I think there are institutions where members of the boards and trustees have been there for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
I think at times the reasons people are on boards or in trustee positions, I think that varies sometimes by institution and over time. So you may end up with quite a mix in some respects in terms of your boards and your
Hmm.
trustees. How do they? How do you work with them? How do you to enable agility uh,
Yeah.
during periods of financial stress? These are people who have been there probably in many cases for quite a for a period of time. They've seen maybe multiple presidents, multiple deans. They've seen highs and lows. Um, are there particular things that trustees and boards and leaders coming in and meeting with them can do to enable agility during these difficult times?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing right off the jump is a clear understanding of governance versus management. It is a board's role to govern. It is a president and the VP's role to manage. The board can set goals for the leadership team. They can set some direction. They can put in some policy directions around budget, around on campus things. They can give their input of what strategies the management should use. They can set, again, the vision. Oftentimes, policy, shared governance, rules and regulations, and strategic plans come from the board, get worked all the way back up, and are approved by the board. That's how 98% of campuses work. As long as boards understand that their role is to govern and it's the president and the VP's role to manage, I think you're already in a great place in terms of nimbleness and agility for the board. When it comes to a board member's role in that nimbleness, I'm going to be very candid, and I'm going to get a lot of laughs. I'm sure it is your job to connect and raise money for a private institution. Like
Give
that
her
is your
get.
role.
Give her
Yep,
get.
exactly. So I think as your role as a board member, you can demand metrics and milestones, but you've also got to connect and influence, and you've got to make sure that the institution stays in a good fiduciary position, because at the end of the day, the institution really can only be as nimble as the resources it has at its disposal. So you've got to be able to empower the institution with resources, whether it's local connections to partnerships, like we've talked about, whether it's physically going out and donating or raising money to have cash in the door to make some of the investments that you would like to make, or if it's getting out of the management's way and just being very candid. There are a lot of boards that want to reach in and do a lot of the management. And oftentimes, the best thing a board can do is to trust the people that you've hired and trust the president, and to let them lead and guide the institution as they see fit. But I think last thing I'll say on the board is lean in and demand metrics, and demand outcomes, but really stay out of the micromanagement of the institution, because that right there will help the nimbleness of the institution.
All
Also,
right.
David.
A Canadian institution or any institutional president really called you tomorrow and
Mm.
said, how do I begin building nimbleness? What would you advise as the first discipline step?
Oh boy. To start building in nimbleness, I would begin asking questions around what the campus looks like now. And if those answers, I would say candidly, were not sufficient, I would encourage and recommend that the president starts doing a better, excuse me, the president starts getting a better grasp and pulse check of what's going on campus right now. Because again, nimbleness, you have to understand your starting position to then move nimbly. So really beginning to understand where the campus is currently, what challenges lie ahead, and to really do, whether it's an old school SWOT analysis, whether it's a large 360, whether we're coming in and doing a deeper dive analysis, it's you've got to understand your current positioning to then begin to act nimbly. And part of that current positioning is what assets you have at what assets and resources you have at your disposal, what overhead or debts that you are carrying financially, what's standing in your way policy wise, what does it look like, what things are coming up that you're married to, I would say over the next 12 to 24 months that could hold back or stand in the way of the nimbleness. Um, and really trying to understand again your current positioning, and making sure that you understand it and then start communicating that with your senior team and the faculty about this is where we're at, and to begin really being transparent and start to craft a vision for the next 18 to 24 months about this is where we'd like to go, these are the opportunities that we would like to pursue, and this is how we're going to do it.
Okay. All right. Jack, thank you so much. I've taken a lot of your time. I'm sure there are many voicemail messages from presidents and other people from institutions wanting your to talk to you today. Jack's bio, as well as link to Steven's strategy, will be in the notes to this episode. Check out Steven's strategy online. They do very, very interesting work. And I have about 100 more questions that I would love to ask. But we've taken a lot of his time. So thank you very much, Jack, for contributing your expertise and your generosity of time to help us learn. Those of you watching, if you like this type of episode, this type of material, hit like. You will see the episodes and the shorts of the episode posted across social media, our social media platform for the Fox Education and the Business of Higher Ed podcast. So, Jack, thank you very much. To all those listening at home or watching at home, have a lovely day. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, David.
Thank you.